This is where one of the most important and overlooked conversation in medicine comes in, and it's called epigenetics. Genes load the risk, but lifestyle shapes the expression. That doesn't mean that lifestyle cures immune diseases. It means that lifestyle helps decide how loudly your genetics speaks. This is the Transformational Life Consulting Podcast with Deepa, Grandon, MD, where Christians like you get the practical support and tools you need to build your spiritual, mental, and physical well-being, and to guide you on your journey to health and wholeness based on evidence-based science and God's Word. I am your host, Dr. Deepa Grandon. Welcome back to another episode of Time to Transform, and a warm welcome to our first-time listeners. In today's episode, I want to slow things down for a moment. I want to reflect on the snapshots I'm so privileged to glimpse every day, small but meaningful moments in the lives of my patients and clients. As a physician, people often think my work is all about diagnosis, labs, treatment plans. But truly, what I actually witness day after day are humans trying to make sense of their bodies and their stories. I see patients who are grappling with questions that aren't just medical, but deeply personal. Questions like, is this just how I was born? Is my family history my future? If this is genetics, does it really matter what I do? There's often this quiet tension in these conversations, like a mixture of resignation, but also hope. Resignation because genetics can feel final, but also hope because something in them lets them know there is room for change. So almost inevitably, the question comes next. Can lifestyle actually alter how my genes behave, or am I just fighting biology, right? Very good question. And that question really is the heart of what today's conversation, or I would say episode, is what it's going to be about. Because the answer isn't a simple yes or a no. It's more nuanced, more honest, and I believe far more empowering. So let me start with a moment I see all the time. A patient sits across from me and says, "Hey, doc, you know what? I've tried everything." And usually they've already seen multiple specialists. They're on medications. Their labs sometimes don't really say anything. They look fine. And yet the patient feels exhausted. Their body feels inflamed. They feel like their body is overreacting to different things. So then comes the next question. Is this just how my body is? And that question, it just stays with me because the honest answer is both yes and not exactly. So in allergy and immunology, we know something very clearly. Many chronic inflammatory conditions are genetically driven. For instance, asthma, allergic diseases, chronic urticaria, immune dysregulation. And it's not just about willpower. It's not about doing something wrong. For instance, large genetic studies, many published in journals like the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, Nature Reviews Immunology, have shown us that immune risk is usually genetically driven. It's built into our systems. But here's the part that patients don't always hear. While genetics can explain risk, it doesn't always explain severity. I often think about two patients I've cared for over the years. They have the exact same diagnosis, very similar genetic risk, but one lives in a cycle of constant flare-ups. Their body is so reactive, they feel frustrated, they feel discouraged. The other, while they're not cured, their manifestation is a little bit more steady, more predictable, and their immunity is more resilient. Now, the difference here isn't that one has better genes. It isn't that one has a different type of DNA. It's just about how these genes are being regulated day after day by the lifestyle choices that they've been making over the long term. So for me, this concept isn't theoretical. It's actually very personal. I noticed that because of my family history of diabetes and heart disease, I have to be far more intentional about my food choices, being intentional about exercising regularly than someone without a family history like mine. So what I can tolerate metabolically is simply different. And I've noticed the older I've gotten that it really plays out into how my labs check out. For instance, even that occasional indulgence in sweet treats, something that might not meaningfully affect someone else, can actually push my hemoglobin A1C in a direction that I'm not comfortable with. And that matters because I don't have the same margin for error. I've also learned something very important about myself along the way. I have a tendency towards sugar addiction. So for me, moderation doesn't always lead to balance. It often leads to escalation. So rather than constantly fighting that cycle, I'm better served by setting clear boundaries, not out of restriction, but out of respect for my biology. And so I don't see it as punishment, but rather precision. And this is what I try to help patients understand. Lifestyle choices aren't about perfection or moral virtue. It's just more about responding wisely to the body that you've been given, right? So this is where one of the most important and overlooked conversation in medicine comes in, and it's called epigenetics. So for decades, we thought genes were destiny, but epigenetic research described extensively in journals like Nature and Cell has shown us something truly remarkable. Genes don't act alone, they respond to signals, and your body is constantly responding to the environment. It's asking questions like, am I safe? Am I under threat? Do I have enough resources? Am I living in scarcity? Do I feel rested? Am I inflamed? And that's where lifestyle choices like sleep, nutrition, stress management, movement, these environmental factors, they don't change your DNA, but they influence things like which inflammatory pathways are amplified or which are quietened. So I often tell patients genes load the risk, but lifestyle shapes the expression. So that doesn't mean that lifestyle cures immune diseases. It means that lifestyle helps decide how loudly your genetics speaks. One of the most harmful ideas that I've come across in chronic disease is the promise of a cure, because a cure cannot exist in this type of immune regulation based on genetic description. So most immune-mediated conditions are managed, not erased. And that's not necessarily a failure, right? So medical literature usually defines success in chronic immune states as being one where there are fewer flare-ups, better symptom control, improved quality of life, and even just better response to necessary medication. Because sometimes stability is transformative. So for some patients, needing more medications for longer duration can actually be moving backwards. But if you're responding to your medications appropriately in the right amount of time, that in and of itself can define success for that specific patients. So when patients start to understand their bodies, they stop chasing miracles and they actually start building momentum. So here's the challenge though, right? Conversations like these take time. They require context. They require listening. And unfortunately, most healthcare systems are simply not built for that. It's not because clinicians don't care. It's because the structure doesn't allow space for this kind of depth. So at some point, I had to ask myself, if I truly believe that immune health is shaped over time, if I truly believe that lifestyle influences inflammatory burden, and if I believe that patients actually do better when they understand their condition, then I do need to practice in a model of care that allows for education, continuity, and partnership. So that's exactly why I built a physician-led telemedicine practice that focused not just on allergy and immunology, but lifestyle interventions. And this is not to replace medications and not to promise cure, but realistic outcomes, really to create a space for precision, realism, and to provide agency for my patients. So this approach is for people who are ready to stop asking the question, hey, what is the next thing I should try? Or is there an actual cure for me? But rather to ask the question, how do I work with my body for better long-term results? So it's for patients who understand that genetics matter, but don't want genetics to be the only voice in the room. It's also designed to support and not replace the care patients receive from their primary care physicians and other specialists. So when patients ask me the question now, is this just how my body is? I tell them, you know what? Your biology has provided you a storyline, but the good news is you decide how that story unfolds. We may not change the opening chapters of our life, but with intention, science, and partnership, we can influence how that story unfolds in real time. So, if this way of thinking about health resonates with you, I'll share more resources in the show notes. Thank you for listening and for making the decision to take the time to understand your body more deeply.